Labyrinth, The War on Terror, published by GMT, is definitely one of the most highly anticipated war games of 2010. Many people pre-ordered it, like I did, and then they played it as soon as they could. The theme is, well, the war on terror, so one player will play the US side and the other player will play the jihadist fundamentalists, so the terrorists. Definitely it's a theme that might make some people feel uncomfortable, some people might find it controversial, but I'm also sure that most gamers, especially war gamers, are well aware of the fact that games of this type, they really are abstractions from history. Technically speaking, they are historical analysis. When a game gives you a good picture of the economic, political, military situation of a certain area in a certain period of time, it might be very old, ancient history, it might be very recent, it is still history. But when you have that picture of how things went and you play one of the sides, you really, if the design is good, get to have a phenomenal understanding of history, such a deeper experience of how history works. You really get to see, oh, this is why that party, that group did this certain thing because they wanted to prevent that other thing from happening. Oh, that's why they couldn't do that because otherwise, da 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 da. It can be a pedagogical tool, but it's just such an interesting way of really seeing how history is at work. And understanding something is very different from endorsing something or endorsing what happened. When I teach about history of Italian fascism in my classes, well, I can tell you that that does not mean that I am any fan of Mussolini. Also, games of this historical type, even though it's recent history, do require a little bit of suspension of your regular frame of reference, I would say. If you ever played a World War II game, Eastern Front war game, chances are that at some point you were playing Stalin or Hitler, and those weren't exactly volunteers of the Salvation Army either. So if you can get past the theme, it doesn't make you feel too uncomfortable, you feel that you want to understand how the mechanisms behind that theme work, then this might be a good game for you. Also, is a game that is sad, has received a lot of buzz already. There are demos around available, tutorials, overview, a lot of material. So I'll try not to repeat too much what you can already find somewhere else. And what I'll try to do is to give you a sense of the gameplay, of how the game actually plays, what are the experiences that you have when you're playing it, the challenges that you will be facing, the strategies that you might have to come up with. So I'll try to emphasize that as much as I can. The game is definitely very approachable in terms of complexity. The rulebook has only 16 pages, and actually some of these are scenarios. You have a glossary index. You have rules for the solitaire game, what the ice does. So actually, the real game, the main game, the two-player game only has 11 pages. The first section is basic concepts about things that are on the board, how the counters and the areas of the board work. The thing that might take a little more of work is when you get to the section about the US operations, so what are the specific things that the US player can do, and the jihadist operations, so what are the specific things that the jihadi player can do. This is completely asymmetrical gameplay. The two sides play completely differently, so it might take a little bit more than with a symmetrical game, because you really need to know exactly what both players can do before you can play effectively. To help you with this, it's very clear, very well designed, typical high quality GMT explanation of rules. But in case you need some extra help, you also have this substantial playbook that has extensive and illustrated examples of gameplay, of two-player gameplay, solitaire, and then very useful, especially the first couple of times you play, is the guide to operations. That it tells you, how do I get where I want to go? So what are the steps, the intermediate steps to achieve certain things? And that's very useful. However, the most incredible of all things I find is this couple of player aids. Both player aids have a side that is the same, and it has all the tables that you need to use in the game. So they're always there, very easy to consult and to look at, always at hand. The other side is different for each player, and it summarizes what the USA operations and the jihadi operations are. And this little player aid here is organized really well. These boxes manage really to capture all the information that you need. Is organized clearly, visually, it's very easy to understand and retrieve, and that is also very synthetic. In just a few keywords, they really manage to tell you all you need to know, to remind you of all you need to know. There is a huge amount of information that is compressed in these 2/8s, and they will really help the game flow smoothly starting from the very first time that you play it. I also want to show you the flowcharts for the Solitaire gameplay. In Solitaire, you will play the US player, and the board will play the jihadist side. And as you can see, there are these very interestingly designed flowcharts that tell you how the jihadist player will play his cards. For events, and then how, or for operations, and then what type of operation and where that might take place. And according to the type of operation, different system of priorities that make the AI act in a smart way where it's most convenient and useful for them. There are special rules here. Some are particularly strong that help the AI. They have an advantage on the human player. So there was a lot of work in here, and the Solitaire gameplay is very different in a way from the 2-player, but it is convincing. It really is a good Solitaire in its own. So if you like Solitaires, it's definitely a good thing that you have the option of having one that has been built in what also is a convincing 2-player game. This is a card-driven game, so the actions that you execute on the board will be directed by the cards that you will play. Each card has an alignment, which can be the jihadist alignment, the US, or neutral. We'll have here a number from 1 to 3 that represents the number of actions. Here they're called operations that you can execute, and a specific special action that is described in the text. Something that you can do, and it's an interesting option, you can play cards for reserves. For example, suppose I only have these 2 cards and I need 3 operations, then I play the number 1 card here. All I do is just I mark that I spent that card to create reserves. Then I play the number 2 card, I consume this reserve, and it's like as if I had played a 3 card. So that's interesting choice there. Other very interesting choices come from the fact that, like in other GMT games, you can play cards as operation or as action only if they are in your own alignment or they are neutral. If they are the cards of the enemy, suppose I am the US here, then you can play it for operations only. But, and here is the catch, when you're playing the card of an enemy as operation, the event here, which of course is usually helps the enemy, it helps the person of that alignment, the event still happens, it still takes place. So I'm playing this card that is 1 for operation, and yet something that the jihadist will do something. And here are the choice that is interesting. I can choose the order, so sometimes actually we'll do an action that will make it hard for the enemy to take advantage from that extra bonus that I'm giving him, really. But, and this is again what really makes, I think, hand management shine in this game, is the fact that some of these special events, they will have a trigger. So these are both jihadist events. And if I'm the US player and I have this hand, well, it's very problematic. And some events, they just happen. You read the text and it happens. The only choice that you have is which one goes first. Some other events, however, have a trigger. Like this one is Al Jazeera, and it says, play if Saudi Arabia or an adjacent country has troops. So the effect is definitely negative to me, but actually there might be situations where that does not apply. Suppose that this doesn't apply, I don't have any troops there, or in an adjacent country, then actually I can play for operations, which is the only thing I can do. I do not have to activate this event. So in another game, These two cards would be the same for the US. They could be played in the same, in any order, just always for 3 operations. Whereas here, in the first part, in the early part of the turn, actually you might create a situation, a condition, so that the negative events of a certain card do not apply. Suppose that I'm able early in the turn to do something to move my troops out of Saudi Arabia without going too much out of my way when I want to do something else, then I can play this one and not be harmed by it. Each turn, each player will receive a number of cards that will depend on the resources they have available. So even there, on the size of your hand, there are decisions to be made. And then each turn is broken down in several play sequences. Each sequence starts with the jihadist player playing 2 cards. So maybe he will go around and move the cells and travel, recruit new cells, launch minor and major jihads, or a much dreaded thing, that jihadist player might try to plot. And in that case, if he chooses that action, he might be able to place on the board 1 or more terror plot marks. And those terror plots might be not so bad, or they may be WNDs. In that case, they would be devastating for the player that plays the US. And these terror plots, if they actually do go off, usually they worsen the situation of the country where they happen, they give funding to the jihad, they can really affect the prestige of the US. So it's really something that the US does not want to happen. So at that point, the US has the possibility, actually that's the second part of the pre-sequence, to play 2 cards. So in a certain way, the US is always reacting to what the jihad does, which historically makes sense. And there will be this sort of like countdown doom clock sense when you know, for example, that there are plots on the board. And the US very often would just try to use special actions to eliminate these. So you spend cards and use special action, maybe you'll be able to eliminate 1, maybe both. It really depends on the situation, how you're playing, how much you want to commit to this. Because, and here's the tricky thing, sometimes if you just keep doing this, eliminating the plots before they're resolved, you as the US might not be able to do much else. The jihad really has a chance of keeping the US busy here and maybe doing something else. So there will be times where you'll be trying to just get rid of 1 and try to do something else in the meanwhile. Otherwise, if you're always just reacting, always defending yourself, and you won't be able to do other things that you need in order to win. So as the US, what I really like is that very often you have to take calculated risks. You have to assess how dangerous is that plot going to be? Where is this going to go off? And how would that affect me? And sometimes you will have to deliberately let some plots on the board and use your resources somewhere else.